mean I'll see it.
Living in that house always felt a little off, but you know how it is when you grow up somewhere. You just get used to the creaks in the floorboards and the way the shadows seem to stretch a bit too far when the sun goes down. My mom had this thing she did, this habit that used to feel comforting when I was a little kid but started getting really weird as I got older. She'd come into my room in the middle of the night just to check on me. I'd wake up in that hazy, half-conscious state and see her silhouette standing right there at the foot of my bed. She wouldn't say a word. She would just stand perfectly still, a dark shape against the dim light from the hallway, watching me sleep. I used to think it was sweet, in a protective kind of way. But lately, the vibe had changed. The air in the room would get stifling and thick, almost like the oxygen was being sucked out of the space, leaving only this dense, stagnant pressure. She'd stay there for what felt like hours. Sometimes I'd keep my eyes squinted, pretending to be out cold, just waiting for her to leave so I could breathe normally again. She never moved. She never shifted her weight. She just loomed there like a piece of furniture that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I decided to play a joke on her because I wanted to catch her in the act and maybe make her realize how creepy she was being. I bought one of those small digital voice recorders and tucked it deep inside my pillowcase, right near the edge where the microphone could pick up the sound of the door opening. I figured I'd play it back the next morning and tease her about how long she spent staring at me. I thought it would be a funny moment, something we'd laugh about over breakfast while the sunlight was hitting the kitchen table. That morning, I woke up feeling exhausted, like I'd been running a marathon in my sleep. My limbs felt leaden and sore. I reached into the pillowcase and pulled out the recorder. I saw that it had captured over 6 hours of audio. I sat on the edge of the bed, put on my headphones, and hit play. The first few hours were exactly what you'd expect. Just the muffled sound of me tossing and turning, the rustle of the blankets, and the distant hum of the refrigerator from downstairs. Then, about 3 hours in, I heard the distinct, agonizingly slow groan of my bedroom door opening. It didn't open all the way, just enough for someone to slide through. Then, silence. Total, absolute silence for nearly 4 hours. I fast-forwarded through most of it, watching the timer tick by. The silhouette must have been standing there the whole time. Just as I was about to give up and turn it off, I heard a sound that made the hair on my neck stand straight up. It wasn't the sound of my mother. It was a wet, sliding noise, like someone dragging a piece of raw, butchered meat across a hardwood floor. Then came the breathing. It wasn't human. It was deep, rattling, and sounded like there was fluid sitting in the back of the throat, a thick, bubbly rasp that seemed to struggle for every lungful of air. A voice finally broke the silence. It sounded like my mother's voice, but it was wrong. It was warped and stretched out, like a vinyl record being played at the slowest possible speed, pitching the words down into a guttural, vibrating growl. It whispered right near the pillow, so close I could hear the click of its jaw. Still breathing. Still warm. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. The voice repeated that phrase over and over for 10 minutes. Not yet. Each time, the voice sounded a little less like my mother and more like something trying to remember what a human was supposed to sound like. The recording ended with the sound of something clicking, a sharp, bony snap, and then the door clicking shut. I sat there in the silence of my room, the headphones still clamped to my ears, feeling a wave of cold sweat break out across my skin. My stomach felt like it had been dropped into a vat of ice. I walked out into the hallway, my legs feeling like they were made of water. I needed to see her. I needed to see my mom and realize this was just some messed up prank or a glitch in the recorder. I found her in the kitchen. She was standing by the sink, her back to me. She was wearing her usual nightgown, the one with the faded floral pattern. I called out to her, but she didn't turn around immediately. When she finally did, her movements were stiff and jerky. She looked normal, but there was a vacant, glazed-over look in her eyes that made me want to bolt out the front door. I didn't say anything about the recording. I couldn't. Instead, I just stood there, staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman who made me school lunches with the thing I heard on that tape. As I turned to go back upstairs, I caught a whiff of something. It wasn't the smell of breakfast. It was a cloying, sickly sweet stench, like a pile of wet lilies left to rot in a closed room, mixed with the sharp, iron-like tang of a fresh wound. It was the scent of something decaying while it was still trying to live. I went back to my room and closed the door, locking it for the first time in years. I started looking around, my eyes searching for anything that felt out of place. That's when I noticed the hallway mirror through the crack in the door. I walked over to it, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. The mirror was an old, ornate thing with a thick wooden frame that reached almost to the ceiling. It was covered in a fine layer of gray dust because we never cleaned the very top of it. It was simply too high for anyone in the house to reach without a ladder. Scrawled into the dust at the very top of the frame, in jagged, shaky letters, were 2 words, "Sleep well." I stared at those words until my eyes burned. My mom is barely 5'4". Even if she stood on her tiptoes and reached as far as she could, she wouldn't have been able to get her fingers within 2 feet of the top of that frame. Whoever, or whatever, had written that message had to be at least 7 feet tall. They had to be standing right behind me in the hallway, looming over the mirror while I was asleep, watching my reflection in the dark. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The silhouette I had been seeing every night at the foot of my bed wasn't my mother. It was something else that had been mimicking her, something that had been waiting for me to reach a certain state, maybe a certain level of fear, or maybe just waiting for my body to be ready for whatever it had planned. I looked down at the floor near the mirror. There were small, dark droplets on the carpet. They weren't bright red, they were a deep, brownish maroon, thick and viscous, like old syrup. I knelt down and touched one. It was tacky and stuck to my finger, leaving a stain that looked like rust and felt like grease. It didn't smell like copper. It smelled like a butcher shop's trash bin in the height of July. I haven't slept in my room since then. I've been staying on a friend's couch, but I can't stop thinking about that recording. I can't stop hearing that wet, distorted voice whispering that I'm still warm. I keep thinking about the not yet. If I wasn't ready then, when will I be? Last night, while I was lying on the couch, I felt that familiar shift in the air. The room grew stifling, and the silence became so loud it started to ring in my ears. I didn't look toward the kitchen or the dark hallway. I just kept my eyes shut tight, praying for the sun to come up. But even with my eyes closed, I could feel it. I could feel something tall and cold standing right at the edge of the sofa, watching the rhythm of my chest as I breathed. It's still waiting, and I think it's getting tired of being patient.
Next story.
I spent most of that summer in the attic of our old house, mostly because it was the only place where the Wi-Fi didn't reach and my mother wouldn't bother me with chores. It was a suffocating space, filled with the stifling heat of a humid August and the scent of aging wood and mothballs. I was 18, just weeks away from heading to college, and my mom had finally cornered me into clearing out the decades of junk that had accumulated above our heads. She called it a fresh start for both of us. At the time, I didn't realize how literal she was being. The attic was a labyrinth of cardboard boxes, most of them soft with age and crumbling at the corners. I had spent hours tossing out old textbooks and moth-eaten curtains when I pushed aside a stack of dusty winter coats. Behind them, tucked into a crawl space near the eaves, was a gray metal lockbox. It looked out of place. Everything else in the attic was covered in a thick layer of gray grime, but this box was relatively clean, as if it had been handled recently. I remember the way the metal felt against my palms, chilled, despite the rising temperature of the room. It didn't have a key, just a simple latch that had been jammed shut. I used a flathead screwdriver to pry it open, expecting to find old tax returns or maybe some embarrassing photos of my parents from the 80s. What I found instead made the air in my lungs feel thin and useless. Resting on top of a stack of papers was a collection of missing person flyers. They were printed on cheap, standard paper that had yellowed around the edges. I picked one up, my eyes scanning the text. Missing, Isabella Renee Vance. The date at the bottom was from 16 years ago. The location was a small town 3 states away, a place I had never visited in my life. Then I looked at the picture. It was a toddler, maybe 2 years old, with big, white set eyes and a very specific, crescent-shaped birthmark just above her left eyebrow. I dropped the paper as if it had burned me. I crawled over to a cracked vanity mirror leaning against the brick chimney and pushed my bangs aside. There it was. The same pale, curved mark I had looked at every morning of my life. I went back to the box, my breath coming in jagged, uneven hitches. Below the flyers were newspaper clippings. Search for toddler calls for statewide alert, one headline read. Parents of missing Isabella Vance suspect foul play after home invasion. I dug deeper, my fingers brushing against something soft. At the bottom of the box was a small, knitted pink sweater. It was stained. Not with dirt or food, but with dark, brownish red patches that had stiffened the fabric over time. The smell hit me then, not like the dust of the attic, but something deeper, a pungent, sulfic odor that reminded me of rusted iron and old butcher shops. I realized then that the girl in the flyers, Isabella, was me. But my name wasn't Isabella. My name was Maya. I had 18 years of birthdays, school records, and childhood photos that said I was Maya. I tried to think back to my earliest memory, but everything before the age of 4 was a blurred, gray static. I had always assumed it was just the way memory worked. I never questioned why there were no photos of me as a baby, only stories my mother told about a house fire that had cleaned our family albums. A floorboard groaned behind me. I didn't turn around immediately. I couldn't. The silence of the attic had become oppressive, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. I told you that area wasn't ready to be sorted yet, Maya. The voice was calm. Too calm. It was the same voice that had tucked me in every night, the same voice that had cheered at my high school graduation. I slowly looked over my shoulder. My mother, the woman I called Mom, was standing in the doorway of the attic. She wasn't holding a vacuum or a trash bag. She was just standing there, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't look angry. She didn't look caught. She looked disappointed, like I had spoiled a surprise party. "Who is Isabella?" I managed to whisper, my throat feeling like it was lined with glass. I held up the yellowed flyer, the paper rattling in my grip. She stepped into the room, and the door behind her swung shut with a soft, final click. I heard the distinct sound of the deadbolt turning. We were locked in. Isabella was a child who wasn't appreciated, she said, her voice steady and melodic. She walked toward me, her eyes fixed on the lockbox. She lived in a house where her parents fought until the walls shook. They didn't deserve a gift like her. They were careless. They left a window unlocked on a warm night, and they practically handed her to the universe. She stopped a few feet away from me. The light from the single, naked bulb overhead cast long, distorted shadows across her face, making her eyes look like dark pits. "I didn't kidnap you, honey," she continued, her tone shifting into that soothing, motherly lilt that used to make me feel safe. "No, it made my skin crawl. I rescued you. I gave you a life. I gave you a mother who would never, ever let anything happen to you. I saved you from a life where you wouldn't have been loved as much as I love you." I looked down at the blood-stained pink sweater in the box. What happened to them? The people in the news? Isabella's parents? Her expression didn't flicker. She reached out and tucked a stray hair behind my ear, her fingers cold and dry. They weren't part of the plan anymore. They were obstacles. And obstacles have to be cleared away if you want to build something beautiful. The realization hit me with a sickening force. The stains on the sweater, the home invasion mentioned in the clippings. She hadn't just taken me. She had destroyed everything I actually belonged to. I was living with a murderer. I had been eating breakfast, watching movies, and sharing secrets with a woman who had likely slaughtered my biological family to satisfy her own twisted need to be a mother. "No," she said, patting my cheek. The gesture felt violent in its forced affection. "Put all of that back. It's a part of the past that doesn't matter anymore. We have so much to do before you leave for school. I've made your favorite for dinner. Beef bourguignon. I've been simmering it all afternoon. It's so tender it just falls apart." She turned toward the door, unlocking it and holding it open for me. She waited, a thin, expectant smile on her face. I looked at the lockbox one last time. I thought about screaming, about lunging for the stairs, about trying to overpower her. But I looked at her eyes, those flat, glassy eyes, and I realized she had been watching me for 16 years. She knew my every move before I even made it. She had spent nearly 2 decades crafting a lie so perfect that I had never even suspected the foundation was built on a graveyard. I stood up, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I left the box where it was, the face of the missing toddler staring up at the rafters. "Coming, Mom," I said. My voice sounded hollow, a puppet's imitation of a daughter. As I followed her down the narrow wooden stairs, the house felt different. The walls seemed to be leaning in, the air thick with the iron-sweet scent of the dinner she had prepared. I realized then that I wasn't going to college in 2 weeks. I wasn't going anywhere. She had kept the flyers for 16 years as a trophy, a reminder of what she was capable of. We sat at the table in silence, the only sound the clinking of silverware against porcelain. She watched me eat, her chin resting on her hand, a look of pure, terrifying devotion on her face. Every bite felt like ash in my mouth. I knew that if I looked toward the basement door, or if I lingered too long near the landline, that cum mask would slip. I am Isabella Vance, and I am sitting across from a monster who thinks she is my savior. I don't know how many other Isabellas are buried under the floorboards of the homes she lived in before this one. I only know that she is smiling at me, and outside, the sun is setting, and the doors are all locked from the inside.
Next story.
I used to think my mother was just overprotective, the kind of woman who never really learned how to let go. You know the type. The ones who still try to cut your meat when you're 20 years old and call you 5 times a day just to ask if you've eaten any vegetables. For years, I told myself her behavior came from a place of love, even the weird stuff, like how she kept that old, chunky baby monitor on my nightstand until the day I moved out. She told me it was because of the night terrors I had as a kid, the ones where I'd wake up screaming about someone standing in the corner of the room. She said she needed to be able to hear me so she could come running, so she could keep me safe. When I finally signed the lease on my own place, a small studio on the far side of the city, I felt this incredible sense of relief. It was like I could finally breathe without someone else's lungs. Of course, she didn't make the move easy. She cried for 3 days straight, telling me the world was too dangerous for a girl on her own. But on the morning I left, she seemed strangely calm. She handed me a gift, a beautiful, vintage-style silver frame with intricate scrollwork around the edges. Inside was a photo of the 2 of us from a summer vacation years ago. She told me to keep it on my bedside table so I'd never feel alone. The first few weeks were great, though I kept having this nagging sensation of being watched. I figured it was just the phantom limb version of her hovering. I'd be changing for bed or talking to my boyfriend, Marcus, on the phone, and I'd get this prickly chill on the back of my neck. I'd look around the empty room, seeing nothing but my own reflection in the window or the dull glint of that silver frame. It wasn't until a few nights ago that things got weird. I was dusting the dresser, something I rarely do, and the sunlight hit the frame at a very specific angle. There was a tiny, unnatural reflection coming from one of the little decorative flowers in the metalwork. It It was a pin-sized hole, perfectly circular, right in the center of a silver petal. My stomach didn't just drop, it felt like it turned into lead, a thick, sinking mass in my gut. I took the frame to the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pried the back open with a butter knife. Tucked behind the photo, nestled in a hollowed-out section of the wood backing, was a micro camera. It was one of those high-end ones, the kind that connects directly to a Wi-Fi network and has infrared night vision. It was angled perfectly to see my bed and the doorway to the bathroom. I stood there in the silence of my kitchen, just staring at it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt this cold, oily dread slide down my spine. She wasn't just checking on me. She was collecting me. I knew she was out at her weekly bridge club, so I did something reckless. I drove back to her house. I still had my key. The place was dark, smelling of that lavender floor wax she obsessed over, and something else, something faint and slightly sweet, like rotting fruit hidden at the bottom of a bin. I went straight to her office. Her computer was logged in. She always was terrible with passwords. I found a folder on the desktop hidden inside a system directory. It was simply titled Archive. When I clicked it, my breath hitched. There were subfolders for every year of my life, but the most recent one was labeled with the address of my new apartment. I opened it and saw hundreds of hours of footage. There I was, sleeping. There I was, coming home from work. There were recordings of every private conversation I'd had with Marcus. But then I saw a folder titled Correction. I clicked the first video. The timestamp was from 3 nights ago. The camera wasn't in the frame, it was a different angle, shaky, like a handheld phone. It showed the back of my apartment building. I watched as a dark figure, my mother, used a spare key I didn't even know she had to enter my home while I was at work. She wasn't looking through my things. She was in the kitchen. Marcus had been there that day to drop off some groceries. In the video, he walked into the kitchen, looking confused to see her. They started talking, but there was no sound. Then she reached into her knitting bag. She didn't pull out yarn. She pulled out a heavy, sharpened tailor's shear. The way she moved, it wasn't the movement of a frantic, worried mother. It was precise, methodical. She stepped into his space, and before he could react, she drove the blades into the soft tissue of his throat. I watched, frozen, as the screen filled with a spray of dark, arterial fluid. It didn't look like the movies. It was thick, almost black in the low light, soaking into his white t-shirt instantly. He fell, clutching his neck, his legs kicking against the linoleum. She just stood over him, watching the life drain out of him with a look of intense, motherly pride. When he stopped moving, she didn't panic. She pulled out a roll of heavy-duty plastic sheeting. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I clicked away, my mouse hand shaking so hard I could barely control the cursor. I saw a text file at the bottom of the folder. It was a log. Day 14, she's distracted by the boy. Focus is slipping. Needs a reminder of who loves her most. Day 18, correction successful. The house is quiet again. She doesn't know how much I do for her. Then I saw the last entry, dated this morning, just hours ago. She found the lens. She's getting smarter. Time to visit. The sound of the front door clicking open downstairs nearly made my heart stop. The lavender scent of the house was suddenly overwhelmed by that other smell, the one I hadn't been able to place. It was the scent of iron and salt, the raw, stinging aroma of a butcher's shop that's been left uncleaned in the heat. It was the smell of Marcus, or what was left of him. Sweetie, are you here? Her voice was like honey poured over broken glass. It came from the bottom of the stairs. I heard her footsteps, slow, deliberate, the sound of someone who has all the time in the world because they know there's nowhere for the prey to run. I looked around the office for a weapon, but there was nothing but pens and paper. I crept to the door and peered through the crack. She was standing at the base of the stairs, holding a tray. On it was a glass of milk and a plate of cookies. But her clothes, her floral blouse was stained with dark, crusty patches that looked like dried mud. And in her other hand, she wasn't holding a napkin. She was holding the tailor's shears. I managed to scramble out the second-story window, sliding down the porch roof and dropping into the bushes. I didn't care about the scratches or the way my ankle twisted when I hit the ground. I ran to my car and didn't stop driving until I reached the police station. But here's the thing that's kept me awake for the last 48 hours. The police went to the house. They found the archive folder. They found the bloodstains in my kitchen, scrubbed but still glowing blue under the luminol. They found Marcus's car parked 3 blocks away from my mother's house. But they didn't find her. And they didn't find Marcus. Last night, I stayed in a hotel under a fake name. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft scratching at the door. Not a knock. A slow, rhythmic scraping, like metal against wood. I looked through the peephole, but someone had covered it from the outside with a piece of tape. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from an unknown number. No words. Just a photo. It was a picture of me, taken from the corner of the hotel room ceiling. In the photo, I'm looking at the door, my face pale and terrified. And in the corner of the frame, just barely visible in the shadows of the closet, is the glint of a silver scrollwork frame. She's not just watching me anymore. She's pruning the world until there's nothing left but her and me. I can hear her breathing through the vent in the bathroom now. It's a wet, ragged sound. She's waiting for me to get tired. She's waiting to come in and tuck me in one last time. I don't think I'm ever going to sleep again.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.